How many innovative products has Google launched in the past 2 decades? So in Pakistan, most business graduates or graduates, I would say, are very happy to sell sugared water. Can do without this type of lateral thinking, which is why you meet most Pakistani CEOs. They won't be talking too much about philosophy or literature and all that. 50 years and say, you know what, I'm going to reinvent how we sell soap. They're going to kick you out. And I think he's the most fascinating Mughal emperor, more than Akbar-e-Azam.
Communication/leading time, this is my creative time, this is where my learning time. You allocate all of those things.
He fell, his son gets up, and Babur dies. You have subjugated the Jewish cities and tribes from the age of 1920. I was writing for Dawn. The fear of default is gone, right? Hannibal Barca, who was one of the greatest generals of all time, in my opinion, the greatest general of ancient times.
Sam Altman making a claim that it'll be a one-man billion-dollar company.
Child prodigies it's a bit of an oxymoron. Alistair Cook, in my opinion, one of the greatest openers of all time.
Healthy relationship with failure. Days or nights where no one was coming to save us, right? I'm very excited to have you here, Sibtain. Strategist, investment banker, writer, author, doing amazing work for Pakistan's ecosystem.
So Mozart was able to play those or write those symphonies. And yes, he was a child prodigy, but his father.
I'm very excited to have you here, Sibtain. A strategist, investment banker, writer, author, doing amazing work for Pakistan's ecosystem. Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience and let's dig deeper into today's conversation.
Well, thank you, Amin. It's a pleasure to be here. It's always a pleasure meeting you. And thank you for that very generous introduction. Yes, I started my career at HSBC, investment banking side, on first reporting into Asia Pacific and then the MENA region. And then following the 2008 financial crash and the 2010 floods in Pakistan, that the two sort of seismic black swan events made me realize that banking has its own sort of challenges in Pakistan, especially on the investment banking side, and B, if you want to make a social impact, then I would like to do something else. And I come from a line of civil servants and poets and calligraphers and artists. So there was that sort of idealism also, you know, there were all these germs were inside in the DNA. And so eventually, after considering different fields, I opted for higher education, set up Pakistan's first liberal arts university. I was there for a number of years, and then entered the technology startup space. Lucky enough to be recruited into Kareem, and then the journey started from there. And then, of course, retailer came into the picture, been there for a while. And since then, it's been interesting, right? Starting different things, looking at different things, being a part of many things at the foundational stage. So yeah, some successes, some failures, but all in all, it's been a learning experience, and that's what life is about.
You know what I find so interesting? We're going to dig deeper into the failures, but you said that being involved in the foundations of many things, right? Why do you think it's important?
So even when I was in a bank, right? Now most people are happy to move a file from A to B. That's their job, especially if you're at a relatively mid-level stage, right? So it wasn't like I was the CEO or the CEO or something. So as a manager, as a AVP or a VP, you're required to do maybe two things. If it's A to Z, the whole process, you're involved in maybe B to D. You know to have to see the whole picture. But I was inquisitive. I would start my day with Financial Times and really knowing what the bank is doing on a global level. And there used to be a weekly newsletter that everybody would get in the bank. And this is 330,000 employees across 180 countries that used to come from London. So, you know, the company newsletter. And I would read it religiously. And I would talk to the people and they wouldn't. They would just be like, hey, we come to work and we do our bit and then it's off to golf or whatever, you know. I remember one day I was entering the elevator and the CEO was there. And there had been a minority shareholder revolt in HSBC Holding. So, you know, minority shareholders can hold the board accountable. It's very transparent in Western markets. So I'd read that and I asked the CEO point blank in the elevator, and there are other people around. This is, you know, 9 a.m. That, what's your opinion on this issue? And he just looked at me. And then everybody realized, and I realized, that he hadn't seen it. And then, you know, like a good communicator, he said, "Oh yeah, I'll get back to you on that." So since then, I was always very interested in knowing really how things work. And this is right from my school days, right? So it wasn't enough for me to know why an electron does this. It's, you know, I would like to know all the way down to the string theory, quarks and all that. So being at the foundational stage was very exciting because you can affect many things in the process. So when I joined the Habib University Foundation, the project, you know, being involved at the business planning stage, like writing the business plan itself, gives you the kind of insight that you can't get after that, right? People who join at a later stage of the company, they don't get that. And nobody can take that away from you. And so that's particularly exciting. So the modern word is startup junkie, you know, people who like to get in early before it becomes too SOP driven or too process driven or too rigid, when things are sort of early and chaotic. So I worship Babur, the Mughal king. So I read the Babur Nama at a very early stage, and I think he's the most fascinating Mughal emperor, more than Akbar-e-Azam, by the way.
Interesting.
In my opinion, because he was able to pivot and he was able to draw lessons. And he was a very colorful personality, you know. He was a gourmet, loved his wine, loved his food, very dramatic. You've heard the story that his son Humayun fell ill and he broke his glasses, he drained his wine bottles, walked 7 times around his son's bed, praying to God to grant him life. On the 7th pass, he fell, his son gets up, and Babur dies.
Wow.
So that's a story, right? Now, could be true, but what does it matter? It's a great story, right? And so Babur was also a startup founder, right? So he laid the groundwork for the Mughal Empire, to this day, a fascinating empire. Everybody knows about it. And that sort of level of excitement that comes early into a venture, that is what fascinates me. So the most interesting part about any religion is the first 30 years, whether you pick Christianity. So you always read the early Gospels. Very few people go into the Council of Nicaea, which happened 300 years later, which actually laid the foundations of what we know as Christianity today. But you're more interested in, what did Jesus do here and there, and what did the apostles do here and there? Same with Islam. The most exciting years are, you know, until the conquest of Makkah.
100%.
So from Nabuwat, when the Prophet Muhammad Rasul gets the revelation, down to the conquest of Makkah. Post conquest of Makkah, that's the Series F investment. Your revenue is coming in, free cash flows. I'm going to use startup terms because I understand this is a startup.
I love that analogy.
So by then the action is done. You have conquered the markets, your business model is rare, your product fit is ready, you have made all the adjustments into your business model.
You have your ashabs, your companions.
You have your ashabs, you have your companions. You have subjugated the Jewish cities and tribes. And once you have defeated the Quraysh, and once you have taken over Makkah, the most important trading hub between, say, Persia and the Babylonian Empire, now you're the most powerful force in Hijaz. And that's when the tribes came and they said, Labak, okay, we don't want to mess with you. Whether we believe in you or not, that's a separate matter. Which is why immediately after his death, many of those same tribes refused to pay zakat, and the first caliph had to then do what are called the jizya wars. So that early foundational stage is the most exciting stage in any venture, including personal relationships. So there's a reason why it's called the honeymoon period, right? And there's a reason why it's called a 7-year itch. That's just how human beings are wired. Whether you look at grand macro systems like countries, so the most exciting period of Pakistan's political history is until the constitution. And when I mean exciting, I mean literally, it's like Game of Thrones, and so on and so forth. So whether it's macro systems like countries, religions, or right down to micro systems as yourself. And to be honest, your most nostalgic years are your early years, your teens. After that, you're in a pattern.
That's beautiful. You know what? Listening to you, right? It reminds me of. So I would have love for humanities as well, right? But then there is a love for technology, and I see in your journey, that intersection that makes everything so beautiful, right? That you can find art in engineering, you can find art in technology, and then obviously if you have the grasp of humanities, you will be able to understand humans at the like the foundational level where things start, right? So I would love for you to just hone in a little bit in your early life, or like the you talked about your family, family of poets and like the writers. So I would love for you to just share that piece of information with us.
So if I go back, all the way 1400 years, my ancestors were from the Prophet's family, and they moved from Medina, and after the Karbala incident, they moved to Iraq, and then from Iraq they came to India, and then they were in India and North India for 800 years. And one of the ancestors includes a qazi at Akbar's court, and the family became quite rich. I mean, family, I mean the entire community, Jagirs and whatnot. And then comes 1857. So 1857, we side with the Mughal emperor. Prior to that, one of my ancestors goes to Plassey to fight for Siraj-ud-Dawla in 1757.
Wow.
So there is this, there's no need for someone sitting in Amroha, which is then, part of the Awadh state. Well, actually, then it was part of the Mughal Empire, but essentially central India, which is today it's Uttar Pradesh. That person goes all the way to Plassey, which is in Bengal, to fight for a Nawab he's probably never met, or at least not close to, right? So, but there is a sense that there's something happening, and I need to be a part of that. So, Dost Ali Sahab, 8-9 generations above me. So there's this connection. My father's maternal grandfather, so his nana, set up the first girls' school in Uttar Pradesh. Ali Ahmad Girls' School still exists today, and this happened in like the 1920s. So he was a contemporary of Sir Sayyid Khan. My paternal grandfather was one of the first graduates of Aligarh University. His younger brother, my grand uncle, is Sadiq, one of Pakistan's most famous artists and personalities. And because of that, the house was a hotbed of writers and poets and politicians and leftists and thinkers and actors and singers, and there are people coming in from India or north of Pakistan or whatnot. And I'm just a child taking it for granted. This is the only life that I know. Like at that time, I'm not comparing myself to XYZ. This is what happens in fact, the imagination is probably that this is what happens everywhere. And so uh, to go from this into business school, which is very straitjacketed, right? So all you're doing is learning about balance sheets or 4 Ps of marketing, or uh, looking at financial statements. Um,
And especially at 21st century's education system, which started early 1900s,
yeah,
and the way it's designed. So you're going to a business school at this
yeah,
and on a micro level, if you would.
yeah, and it's not it's not well developed in that sense, right? So going to business school in Pakistan is very different from going to a business school in the US, or now Western Europe. So that's very straitjacketed. But at the same time, because of this, I was into journalism and writing. My grandfather was a director of Radio Pakistan when radio was the mass medium and all of that. So from the age of 1920, I was writing for Dawn. So there was, on one side, there was this heavy literary, cultural environment, and on the other side, there's this, one has to run the household.
Yeah.
So it was interesting, and even when I was in banking and I would write, someone would read, like a colleague or a senior would read something, they'd say, "What are you doing here? You should be you should be there." And I was like, no, I can balance both. And my model was Yusfi Sahab, the humorist writer. Yusfi Sahab is obviously one of the most famous people in Urdu prose, but he was also the president of UBL. So I thought this is a nice model, but at that time, I mean, the world was different. It was less specialized. Yusfi Saab was like an MA in Urdu or something, like an MA in a humanities subject. He wasn't an HBS graduate, but he went on to become president of UBL. It's a difficult balance, and I can understand why people often sort of struggle with that. And to be honest, it has been a struggle on my side also. But after some time, you find your space. The move to academia to set up the first liberal arts university was not accidental. It was to make sure that if someone after me wants to do this, and liberal arts combines the humanities and the hard sciences, the soft science and the hard sciences very well, right? So you learn about philosophy while being an electrical engineer. So that model did not exist back in my day. Now it exists. So that balance kept coming out. But as you go in life, and especially once you get to senior position, whether in your profession or just at an age, you're able to lean on these different lessons and use them as you will. So it's like having a tool belt. Someone who's gone through, pre-engineering, engineering job has 1 or 2 tools, maybe a hammer or a screwdriver. Whereas someone who's gone through this type of experience has a hammer, a screwdriver, a saw, pliers, whatnot. So they're different. So one can use different things for different problem sets. And then those people tend to become good in strategic positions, where you need to get that 30,000 feet view and then zero into what the issue is, and then able to sort of synthesize all of the data coming in to suggest a solution. And I get most of my lessons from literature, from history, or from actual wars that took place. Yesterday, I was talking to a team member, and I just happened to say, let's just use the Fabian technique on this. And he said, I don't know what that is. And I had to tell him about Hannibal Barca, who was one of the greatest generals of all time, in my opinion, the greatest general of ancient times. and he had landed in Italy, and he was destroying Roman legions left, right, and center until the person the Romans sent was named Fabius, and his technique was, well, we'll just not engage. It's an occupying army. We'll do scorched earth, deny the supply chain, supply lines, and just move around. Because he's so good that if we go directly into battle on an open field, he'll destroy us. So best to just stay away and let the enemy sort of exhaust itself. So disengagement, not doing something is also a strategy.
Mm-hmm.
As Warren Buffett says today, just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. And this wisdom and insight that I'm not a child, I'm not going to react to everything, that comes either through age or failure or experience, or if you're lucky enough to have a great mentor.
That is so powerful. So how much of an impact do you think being born in the settings that you were born in? Do you consider that as a head start, or do you see it as something that one chooses to carve out or go on?
It can be a double-edged sword. People who tend to go far, they are plodders, and they have a single-minded focus. Mark Zuckerberg can't wax lyrical about Shelley or Yeats or Ghalib or Rumi, whatnot, right? But he's a damn good coder. He had to be. And it's a lot to do also with happenstance, but let's not take anything away, right? I mean, the guy's there, he did it. So that focus is very important. Eye on the ball, following the line, being a safe pair of hands. A lot of success comes from that. Having said that, if you have these tools, then you can deal with the headwinds coming your way.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you know to follow one track, if that track gets blocked, then what do you do? On the other side, if you have all of these ideas and you're always sort of existing in this sort of nuance and gray areas, it can overwhelm you also. So it's a fine balance. You need to know when to engage the enemy and when not to engage the enemy. When to control the creativity and channel it, and when to block it out and say, I need to get through this today. And which is why a lot of successful startups have a mix of sort of yin yang, right? They have one person who's the sort of the grand thinker, and then one person who's sort of like, okay, but we need to do this. And which is why successful boards have a mixture of people. That governance structure, if it's there, it works. Otherwise, if everybody's the same, where's the action coming in? Which is why cricket teams, when they're building their pace attack, if all four bowlers are 90-mile-an-hour pacers, then unless you're the West Indies, it doesn't work very well. Mm-hmm. So which is why they want a left arm seamer, a pace bowler, a spinner. So you need to get that variety. So it's like having a cricket team inside you.
So powerful.
So if you are lucky, and if you can do one thing really well, good. Alistair Cook, in my opinion, one of the greatest openers of all time, highest runs for England as an opener, I think 11,000, 12,000 runs, which is very, very hard in English conditions. So he's playing half of his test matches in testing conditions and a fair amount in Australia and on South Africa and New Zealand, which are also difficult conditions. And Alistair Cook had essentially two shots. He had a little nudge on the leg side, and he was good in the, the cover or through the V.
It's a flick in a drive. Yeah.
That's about it.
Hmm.
And he realized, I don't need to be Brian Lara,
Yeah.
and not everybody can be Brian Lara. So it's about understanding your strengths, but also your limitations. And the successful ones tend to play within that. Every once in a while, they will go for that dance down the pitch and hit the ball over the head. But they know that that's a high risk game. And if I want to get to a flashy 50, I can do that. But if I want that big century, if I want those 10,000 test runs, if I want to get those 500 test wickets, I better be very, very good at least one thing.
You just reminded me of Steve Jobs saying, it's the thinkers and doers who make this world a better place, right? And it's the fine balance. And following that, the another thought comes to mind is anything that has ever gone on in the human civilization's history, there has always been two forces, in my opinion. One forces are innovative forces, right? Who love, embrace change. And on the other hand, you would have preservers who want to preserve what's working for us, what's great, right? And both are equally important, in my opinion, right? So you need people who actually are talking about, change, right? They embrace it. But the preservers and the way I articulate this kind of thought process is that innovators wanted to travel faster, right? But we wanted to travel across seas. So we come up with airplanes. And preservers, healthy preservers, right? And that's another day's debate. They come up with parachute, right? Because they wanted to preserve. If you're going at this speed and if something was to happen, you want to have at least a tool to give the fighting chance to preserve, human life per se, right? And listening to your, articulation, I think you are an amazing storyteller, and I love listening to the way you are able to connect these thoughts. And it comes from the depth of knowledge, mashallah, you have. You see, this is where you need to sort of know your why. So you give an example of, Alistair Cook, for example. So if your strategy is to have that flash in the pan, century, you're just going to go in and that's your why, right? This is what you're going to do. But if you have the clarity first that, hey, I'm going to start with my why, and then I'm going to fill my toolkit with what I may or may not need, and then you just use it as it sees fit. It's an art, right? So that's sort of like I'm getting the essence of what you are trying to articulate, right?
Yeah, I mean, and the lucky ones are able to get that filter early on, like I said, right? So it could be your parent or your mentor. So child prodigies are, it's a bit of an oxymoron. We see these people just cropping up like mushrooms, but there's a process behind them. So Mozart was able to play those or write those symphonies. And yes, he was a child prodigy, but his father was a musician and he was pushing him. The Williams sisters, so their father, Richard, had them with a racket when they started walking. Britney Spears' mother was grooming her when I think she started talking. And Britney was part of what was called the Disney Mickey Mouse Club. And they had a song, MICAKYMOUSE. It used to go like that. Bill Gates came from an educated background. His parents were highly educated professionals. He was one of the few people on the planet to have access to what in today's world would be called a supercomputer. So if you can get that, then nothing like it. And then you should have that ability to filter out and develop it. Now, most people who join industry don't need that. So if I graduate, like in Pakistan, and like almost every Pakistani MBA, my dream is to sell fertilizer or a shampoo or toothpaste. As Steve Jobs said to Scully, sugared water.
Hmm.
Scully was the
Pepsi,
head
yeah.
of Pepsi, and he
Yeah.
said, "You want to sell sugar water? You want to do something real?"
Hmm.
So in Pakistan, most business graduates or graduates, I would say, are very happy to sell sugared water. And if you enter a sugar watering company, a company that produces toothpaste or shampoo or auto loans or something, you don't need a lot of lateral thinking. The systems are there. It's not like you will enter a company that has been in existence for 150 years and say, you know what, I'm going to reinvent how we sell soap. They're going to kick you out.
Yeah.
Okay. You can maybe tweak it by like a percent or something. But stories like G and Jack Welch, or they're few and far in between, right? So, or Leoka, General Motors, I mean, that rarely happens. You enter and you go through it. So those people can do without this type of lateral thinking, which is why you meet most Pakistani CEOs. They won't be talking too much about philosophy or literature and all that. They know what they know. They're very good at it.
Hmm.
But essentially, they are a safe pair of hands that have followed a track, and good for them. Startup founders, or startup, not just tech, but business founder, let's just call it that. That's a different breed, especially in the modern day. Because the world we live in today is far more complex than the world that used to exist even 30 years ago, even 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. Today's uh, business founder exists in a globalized world where the barriers of entry and exit are extremely low. Uh, Competition is fierce. And at the same time, the headwinds like AI, and on a grand macro level, there are things like supply chain disruptions and climate change and all those things. So the startups that are in Pakistan, I'm going to come now to the startup space. I mean, you know, few years ago, who would have thought that the Fed raising the interest rates and Russia invading Ukraine is going to completely upend the business model of hundreds of tech startups? So, when the 2008 financial crisis came, Pakistani banks were impacted. They weren't. Multinational banks were, Citi in Pakistan or ABN in Pakistan or HSBC in Pakistan, Habib Bank or whatnot. They were not exposed to the equity markets in the US. They weren't leveraged like that. But startups, because the funding is coming from the Valley and other places, and you're chasing the same investor who has a choice of investing in teak farms in the south of India, uh, buying coffee bean commodity futures, funding a startup in Slovenia, and you're sitting in Pakistan. And when the liquidity is there, like the water in Noah's flood, it's fine. A rising tide brings all boats to the shore, right? That's fine. Beti Ganga mein sab haath dhote hain, right? That's
100%.
fine. But when the water becomes scarce, then only the apex predators get to drink. The antelopes and whatnot, they get either eaten or they have to thin down.
Survival of the fittest.
So, in that scenario, then it's good to have a healthy dose of history and philosophy and understand that when Babur, who grew up dreaming about his ancestor Temur, whose capital was at Samarkand, and the correct name for the empire is Temurids. Mughal is a minsum. It's a mistake, because the Indians thought they are descendants of the Mongols, which they were, but separated by 300 years. It's far more accurate to call them Temurids. So Babur's was, Fergana. It's a little state in I think Uzbekistan, and city in Central Asia, and his dream was to get Samarkand. So he got Samarkand once, lost it. Got Samarkand the second time, lost it. And when he lost it the second time, he lost Fergana also. And then he realized, you know what, I have to pivot. This is hard. Too many battles, too many people like me, hard-nosed, those 90-mile pacers, too many of them. So, but there's a nice kingdom across the Khyber Pass. They've gone fat and indolent. And me with my battle-hardened warriors can maybe try that market. So he tried a different market. He pivoted. So if I was a startup founder today, and if I got beaten down, or if I can't raise funds and all that, what am I going to do? I'm going to pivot. Now, if I'm aware of this sort of philosophy or history, or it's probably going to make my nights a little better. I might sleep a little easier. That, it's not just me. It's happened to this person, that person, because we all need perspective. Essentially, what all of this gives us, whether you read the biblical tales or the stories in the Quran or philosophy or read autobiographies, it should. And that's what, in my opinion, that's the biggest takeaway, what I do. It gives me perspective. That it's not just happening with me, it's happened to XYZ person. They dealt it in this way. Maybe I can try it this. And you need that not when you're succeeding. The intelligent ones do it when they're succeeding also. But you really need it when you've failed. Because that's when you need to pick yourself up. When the money is coming in, you'll paper over a lot of cracks. And it's true for, again, not just professional, personal. The test of a married couple comes when they have to face a tragedy, adversity. And it is, you use a very good word, and this is why previously people used to assume this whole IQ business is the US, right? The US it likes to sort of put people into these sort of boxes. Jock, geek, nerd, something. So, the IQ tests were invented. And they said, if you have 140, you're guaranteed to succeed. Great. And that's where SAT tests and standardized testing comes in, which I don't particularly believe in. But what happened was that they did this study, and they studied a lot of people with very high IQs. People like Bobby Fischer, the chess grandmaster. And they said, they haven't really done as well as we thought they would. Whereas these 120 IQ people have done much better. So that is when EQ, emotional quotients, SQ, social quotients, and AQ, adversity quotient, comes in. That it's not just intelligence, it's not just the ability to put 1 + 1 2 or remember the quadratic equation. It's the ability to how your own emotions work, how you are with other people, and how you face adversity. And AQ for startup founders is critical, because you will get that adversity.
Inevitable. It is inevitable.
Especially now. The go-go 2010s are gone. And they're not coming back anytime soon. It is not imminent that the Fed's going to slash rates back to 0.25.
Yes.
Or Pakistan is going to become this exciting place, which we used to sell to the Valley people that, oh, 200 million plus people, internet density, young youth population, give us the money. It's a little stale. That message is a little stale now.
You know how my brain is processing what you're saying, right? Is that so there is red ocean, there's blue ocean. Not necessarily guaranteed that if you go in a blue ocean, you're going to be fine. Doesn't necessarily mean if you go in the red ocean. But when you start with the red ocean, and if you have that pivot that you talked about at the early stages, that mindset is already there, right? You have already worked on yourself because you said, right, that when things are going great, if they're rosy, it's all well and good, right? But then when shit hits the fan, all of a sudden, no one is coming to save you, and you have to just drag yourself out of that hole. And that's all that matters, right? With adversity. So it reminds me of that saying, a man never crosses the same river twice. Either the man is not the same or the river, right?
Yeah.
So understanding that, right, that you may want and you may believe in something today, be super comfortable with it, have a healthy relationship with failure, but don't have that blind junoon that, hum mein baki sab pani ka mein. I mean, you just got to have that sense of, like understanding and that toolkit that is developed. So you don't want to actually be overly cautious and overly analytical because, fortune favors the bold, right? But that going back to that balance that is required.
Yeah.
And then, the access to the right mentors, the people from the history, the people who were movers and shakers, how did they go about these things? Am I the first one? Because you're not, everything, when I go back as far back as, the existence of humans, everything is cyclical, right? Whatever starts, goes up, comes down, the cycles are there. You may have, different tools, different names, different religions, different ways of us humans doing things, but certain fundamentals always stay the same. So this is how I'm processing it. And my question, which I was just building it up to, healthy relationship with failure. And because we talk about the credentials, we talk about what we are able to talk about, right? And if we don't talk about equally the healthy relationship with failure, right, those days or nights where no one was coming to save us, right, I think it's equally important to spend some time, because we don't want to sort of set the expectations, right, that it's all going to be great if you do X, Y, and Z. No matter how well you prepare, it is going to happen, right? This is just the way life is, right? So earlier on, before we started the conversation, you were saying, right, is that, yes, you're not going to sweat over it, that, oh, the adversity, or it's going to go, against me. But at the same time, at the back of your head, you have to have that proactive way of applying that. So how do you combine the healthy relationship with failure and then being proactive at the same time?
Again, the perspective. Everybody fails. Until Khaybar, the Prophet had a handful of people. And if Hudaybiyah had gone the other way, you might think of the Muslims the way you do of today. You might think of a cult, right? Everybody fails. No, that's religion. Let's talk about companies. So, how many innovative products has Google launched in the past 2 decades, which have made it? They tried hardware, which was phones and Google Glass, didn't work. They tried tablets, didn't work. They tried like a social media platform, didn't work. Okay. Essentially, what's working for them is Chrome and AdWords, right? This is Google. Zuckerberg put billions of dollars into metaverse, changed the name's company to Meta, okay, the virtual reality and all that. Didn't work. Had to lay off more than 10,000 people. which was the last innovative product Microsoft brought out. Those licenses are just keeping the mill going.
Mhm.
Okay. Microsoft actually launched what today we call the tablet before Apple. Microsoft and HP both. Jobs did a better job. And hence iPad is the biggest, or at least if not the biggest, the most profitable tablet on there in the market. Mark Cuban did not invest in Uber. He could have had it very early on, if not pre-seed seed, some very early on. Travis went to him, missed it. So these famous, successful, hugely successful people and companies fail. They fail. But then they keep going. So if they're failing and going, me being a humble little whatever, boy, girl, can also fail. The important thing is to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and say, well, it happened. I need to move on. Going back to the cricket example, you play for the ball that's coming, not the ball that's beaten you. So the outswinger is a ball that I struggle with. Back in my playing days, it's been a while. But if I play and miss, and the thing is, an outswinger can make you look very stupid. So you end up ugly. So A, you've been beaten. B, you've looked horrible looking, like you've been beaten, right? But then if you start thinking that, okay, I'm just not going to play the ball and going out to play that cover drive, you're not going to get any runs. So all the bowler has to do is just keep bowling those outswingers and then sneak in a yorker or something, and you're gone. In any case, you're not making any runs, right? And nobody wants to be Misbah. We want to be the Lara, right? We want to get those runs. So the idea is that if you fail quickly. As in, fail, you get up, move on. The longer you stay in that state, the worse it gets. Secondly, don't anticipate failure. Or don't get consumed by it. You should have it in your mind, but don't rush to a problem. You cross that bridge once you come to it, right? Otherwise you're living that failure every day. It's just like learning, right? So if you're completely not in the stressful state, if you're completely calm and content, there's no learning. You're stagnant. And many people coast through life. The fertilizer sellers and the shampoo sellers, it's fine. They're not learning something every day, right? It's a process-driven job. You come in, do an honest day's work, you leave. If you are extremely stressed out, right? If there's firefighting day in, day out, 10 times a day, then also you're not learning. You're in an extreme high stress situation, which is likely to either lead to burnout or just crash and burn, something like that. So you need a certain amount of stress to keep going, to keep evolving, to becoming that pearl. A pearl is basically a little grain of sand which is irritating the oyster. So the oyster is not irritated enough to kick it out, and it's not dying. It's just going to keep managing it, layering it with with some sort of a bodily fluid. And eventually you'll get a pearl out of it. Or it's like that coal, you put pressure on it. But if you put too much pressure on it, the coal will simply become powder. It needs sustained pressure to become a diamond. So you need to have that sense that, okay, some maybe things will not work out. But I'm not going to consume by it. It's there. Let's not be stupid about it. What people sort of take for granted is these sort of Colonel Sanders stories, or the
Lincoln.
Ray Kroc's, Sam Kroc story. Right? So uh, that's a lot of happenstance. You don't want to go for the outlier stories. You want to go for something that's replicable. That you can sort of do. So just because someone did it at 65 doesn't mean I should wait for 65. Let's use that lesson. Let's try and do it today. Just because someone was absolutely consumed by it, maybe I shouldn't. You see, you have to put context into everything. The US is a different market. You fail in the US, it's fine. You can, what's the worst thing that can happen? You declare bankruptcy, start over. You fail in, say, China or India or Pakistan or Bangladesh. These are very different markets. So don't take the wrong lesson. Filter, sift. It's like going shopping. The knowledge is like a huge mega market, and there are 10,000 grocery items that you can pick up. But you know what you're cooking. So you pick and choose what's working for you rather than put everything into your shopping cart. A, you can't afford, and B, it's stupid. So, like I said, these lessons, you need to know what you're picking. It's great if you have a broad perspective, but then use what you can. Like I said, the Fabian technique works in certain circumstances, but you also need to sometimes, like Hannibal Barca, cross the Alps, do that major pivot, and go all in. So it depends. It's like batting in a one day. A one day is a interesting format because sometimes you have to do a test and sometimes you have to do the T20, which is why it's particularly complicated.
It reminds me of Xerox Park, when Apple's team went, and this is where this saying of Steve Jobs again comes, right? Is that from Picasso? Obviously, a great artist never copy, he steals, right? And stealing is an art, right? And there's a certain level of craftsmanship that has to go into it. So if you're going to just pick something that worked in Silicon Valley and you're going to be like, I'm going to just copy and paste it, right? That's not stealing, that's copying, right? So that's so
well, I think Jobs is trying to justify his own actions.
Yeah, but he was good at it, right? And people,
he was fantastic at it. He was able to improve on what people were doing and then market the heck out of it, which is great. Stealing is a sort of a negative word. You can use getting inspired. So, when I'm using the Fabian technique, I'm not stealing. It's inspiration, which is fine. We all build on that.
And how I define stealing, right? Sometimes words can have unique meaning. So it says hate the sinner, not the sin, right?
Sure.
No, hate the sin, not the sinner. So the way I define it is, if you want to be a chef, right, you're going to follow a recipe, perhaps been used for hundreds of years, right? You're going to just literally follow instructions. And then there is going to be a time in the end where you're going to give a little bit of changes and it's going to become your signature dish, right?
Sure. I mean, look, food or language, and these are continuously evolving, right? That's perfectly understandable. And just like that, human history and product life cycles, everything is evolving. Nothing sort of stays. I mean, if things were stationary, we'd still be sending telegraphs to each other, we'd still be using UNIVAC. But that's fine. I don't disagree with it. I was just sort of
I love it.
But the idea is to, again, you're cooking a great dish, you need to sprinkle in the right ingredients. If you have a great spice rack, you know what to put in when. And just like that, an entrepreneur, it's good if they have all these different perspectives they can pick. The ones that will be able to overcome adversity are likely to be those who have different knowledge sets. If you're good at one thing, in the right circumstances, sure.
It's no, in my personal opinion, and this is my opinion, it's no longer as effective. It's not going to give you an edge. Maybe there was a time when everything,
Yeah.
on the global evolution, like when we were going through post-industrial revolution, there were certain traits that if you were a specialist, that would have done the job, right? But now you need to have certain level of, being a generalist. And then if you think about Abraham Lincoln said, right, if I have 10 days to cut the tree, I'll spend 9 days sharpening my axe, right? But there is an allocated time that you need to sweat over or plan, right? But then once that's done, right, you don't this is how practically I would break it down, right? So if we are planning it, okay, we are planning it, but when we're executing it, you're executing it, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I mean, it's important to develop that one core skill which puts you in that top 1%. So initially, whether you call it the 10,000 hour rule or something else, through discipline or passion, you should have that one core skill. One core skill. It could be coding, it could be public speaking, it could be making shoes. But that one core skill. And then you can sort of layer things on it, right? So it's like when you go and have steak, if the sides are fantastic, the whole meal is great. But if the sides are fantastic, but the steak is not great, you're going to not love the meal. If the steak is superb, but the sides were ordinary, you'll still survive. Of course, if the sides are great and the steak is great, then you have hit it, right? That's a home run. So early on, an entrepreneur, a professional, especially in a sort of a loose environment like a startup, they need to have one thing that they're particularly good at. Maybe it's Excel sheets, maybe it's finance, maybe it's operations, but have that and own it completely.
mm-hmm.
And do that, build up that excellence. So when you talk to someone, you can say, you know what, I can do this. So when Leonardo da Vinci pitched himself to the Duke of Milan, he pitched himself as a engineer. You need ramparts and war weapons and all that. I can do that for you. And by the way, I also paint and do this.
Yes.
So you're selling yourself, whether you're selling yourself to an investor or to an interviewer for a job. Have that core skill.
Yes.
And then you can philosophize and build in those other elements. Unfortunately, the world is that you need, if you're a complete generalist, then it can become a little tricky.
Mm-hmm.
Especially at an early on. Like I said, the world has changed. The humanities has changed. People are not reading. People are not taking degrees in English literature anymore because and with AI coming in and all these things. So have that one thing that you're particularly good at, and then if you can add other things, like I said, build that toolkit. But you need to have one really good tool in your toolkit. The other one sort of augment it.
I used to be a big fan of T structure, right? That, you have these learnings and then you go deep into one. And recently, we heard Sam Altman making a claim that there'll be a one-man billion-dollar company with what's been happening with the technological advancement. Let's say that's his thoughts he's sharing. But similar to that, I had thoughts, right? Where now I look at Comb, right? You kind of, as this is the rapid innovation, this is the world we are entering in, but you need to have that starting point, that POC, that MVP, that you start with one core, but then you go and then you need to have another, like deep dip. Then you go and then you're going to have, and if you have that as a founder, as an entrepreneur, your goal, right? That is structured. This is my, communication / leading time. This is my creative time. This is where my learning time. you allocate all of those things, you craft it, strategize it in a nice manner, you can do a lot of things. And that brings me, and we are coming to an end, and it's been a phenomenal journey and conversation so far, that how you have articulated. You have been doing multiple projects, right? You've been doing a lot of things, right? Surely you have, a structure or a framework that you can share for people to practically take the inspiration from or steal it, right? Um, and what is exciting upcoming, things that you are looking forward to? Any projects that you're working on, and your take on Pakistan's ecosystem in terms of a startup, but that, like the socio-economical, you know view. Yeah, how do you uh,
So is Pakistan's economic history has been like a sine curve. It's cyclical. Um, Again, right now it's in a trough, right? I think we bottomed out last year, so we're in a early recovery stage, very early. Um, so last year was all about firefighting. Now it's okay. So between last year when we were facing default, we got one IMF loan. Now it's another. Conversations happening, of course. The budget, the tax, all of these things are happening. But there is the fear of default is gone, right? So that was like your first sort of okay. So now you can sort of take it up. Opportunities are always there. With this market, the opportunity is there. It hasn't translated very well. So, like I said, um, Taraz came about a decade ago. Uh, Kareem started 15. Uber followed in 16. To date, Uber remains the biggest international tech player to have entered the market. But then we thought it's going to lead to Amazon or someone else coming in. It didn't happen because of various reasons. So we missed that boat. Right? The past decade, we really missed it. And it doesn't seem imminent that that's going to happen. Pakistan continues to be the biggest market where Amazon is not present, right? So one would think 240 million people, per capita GDP around 1500, unofficial much higher, should be here, is not coming. These big technology companies don't have headquarters. Pakistan has, I think, at least the top 10 number of Meta users. There's no local office. Likewise for Google, Microsoft, and many multinationals are leaving. So what does that mean? It means that there's a preponderance of talent. Not everybody is going to be able to leave. I mean, yeah, the numbers are coming. So one number is 700,000 people have left Pakistan in the first 6 months. Okay, how many of them are actually professionals, skilled professionals? Small fraction. But universities are churning out people, right? So even if you consider the top 5 universities of Pakistan or top 10 universities of Pakistan, the good ones, you're talking upwards of 10,000 graduates entering the market. So there's a lot of talent. And if one can harness that, and local companies, the established local companies, whether it's in the food space or in the logistics space, pharmaceutical companies, they're tapping into that talent. So you can build an A team right now far quicker, far easier, at a far lower cost than you would have, say, 7-8 years back. So that is one advantage.
Beautiful insight.
I think the biggest advantage any company has are people. More than systems, more than technology, the human capital. Unfortunately, that's not taken very seriously, which is why invariably the human resource department, the HR department, the people department, they tend to get the least dynamic people because it's seen as sort of like the sort of the putting out to pasture area. It shouldn't be. If I was starting a company, the most critical hire after the tech people would be the people's person. And I would pay a lot of money for that. culture and talent can do wonders.
100%.
Can do wonders. There's a reason why um, some companies do better than others. And if you take a deep dive into that, it's not because of product differentiation. In Pakistan, nobody's at the cutting edge. Pharmaceutical companies don't do research. They all sell generic drugs. Banks don't really do banking. They lend to the government. FMCGs don't do innovation. The formula is there, they sell. So there's no innovation as such. So why is one company better than the other? Comes from, of course, planning and strategy, but people. They're able to get the right people and get it done. And that's also a problem in the reverse. So if the family business owner is not able to give those people the right sort of talent, they go away. And we've seen this happening with many companies in Pakistan. I'm going to take any names. That they were rising. And then Seth Saab said, you know what? The marketing is going to be my daughter. CFO is going to be my other daughter. And, everything else, CEO is my son. And the company goes.
Sad, I know. It's sad. And, you just reminded me of Jim Collins' Good to Great when he talks about 5 levels of leadership. So he starts with 1, this pyramid, and then he talks about level 4 and 5. Very similar, very identical. And then he differentiates, and this is perhaps, it's been a long time, maybe, don't quote me on it, but taking inspiration from that, the way I think is, first you got to start with why, that why are you doing what you're doing? And then you decide who. So the level 5 leaders who brought companies from good to great, because the book starts with good is the biggest enemy of great, right? So the companies who went from good to great, it was the leaders who had these attributes of level 5, right? And those level 5, they said why, and then who. And then they decide what and how and where and when, right?
The why and the what and the where are the easier bits. Why are they easy? Because you can number crunch them. You can moneyball them. I don't know if you've seen that movie with Brad Pitt. But you can use enough data to figure out, which is what consultants do. They look at our data, which is why a lot of consultants fail, because they look at data, which is a lot of economists fail because they look at data. Data is useful as a marker. Human beings are not logical creatures.
Yes.
We are emotional creatures. And emotions eat logic for breakfast. So to convince me, if I'm a young person, maybe I'll be convinced with facts. And facts should convince people. But more often than not, it's other things. Why do you think people are willing to vote for Donald Trump? Because he says facts? No. There's an emotional appeal. That's true for any politician. So you need to understand the human elements of people, and good leaders and good people managers understand that. Culture doesn't come from logic and facts and numbers. It comes from understanding human values and translating them. And that will lead to long-term success.
And it's very difficult. It is.
It is difficult, which is why the leaders understand that. They said, okay, why am I doing it? That's important. You need to know why you're doing it. And then who am I doing it with? Execution is done. There are ways of doing it. There are tools of doing it. Today, you can use so many different, AI tools and various time tracking tools, and there are many of them, right?
Details are
there,
and
there are people who can take care of that. But it's the soft side which is far more complicated, because there are so many different elements in it. Because we're not dealing with robots, we're dealing with human beings, which come with their own set of challenging circumstances and variables and all those things. And that is why having those good people up front helps. I know of many people, myself included, who refuse to start anything until the people were there. And if they weren't there, it didn't get started. Period.
That's very powerful, Sibtain. You have been phenomenal. Thank you for joining us today. We don't want you to be late for your appointment. Again, what is exciting coming up? Closing off this episode, what are things that you're working on? What are you excited about? Is there anything you would like to share with us?
I mean, there are some things in the offing. A couple of there's an exciting startup that we're trying to put together out of there's a fintech, not Pakistani. At the same time, there's a trading platform that's doing quite well. Trying to build that up and figuring out how to take it to the next stage. And then there's some writing projects. There's an institutional history that's coming up. I'll tell you more about it when it's close to publication. But that's exciting, and that has also added to my learning. When you study successful institutions in detail, and I've written the history of the IBA, so it went through its own sort of cyclical phases, success and challenges. Couple more after that, a biography of someone who's worked in different institutions. It all added to my learning. So it was like doing mini doctorates. And of course, reading about an institution and then taking a deep dive into it and writing about it, that just adds more.
100%.
So I've been very fortunate in that I was able to get that opportunity, and let's see where life goes.
That's amazing. We wish you all the luck, Sibtain. You've been, again, amazing. I have learned a great deal today. To be honest, I need to go and now look up some of the names that you referenced, and I would ask you to give me the further details. But thank you so much, Sibtain, and we'll chat to you again sometime in the near future.
Thank you, Amin. Pleasure. Take care.